Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll begin here. This is another installment of the CEO Roundtable. We have a number of people who are online via Zoom, and appreciate all of you joining us here in Meadows Hall. And we had a Ramona Graves sighting. For those of you who are on Zoom, Dr. Ramona Graves sighting, which is awesome. So she was guest lecturing today, but we're really excited to have a panel today. All of you around the globe, we thank you for joining us. This particular program falls during our 100th anniversary year for the Petroleum Engineering Department at Mines. I think that deserves a round of applause. And this gives us a great opportunity to visit with industry leaders, academic leaders, to talk about the future of the industry, education, and careers in petroleum engineering. We are proud to bring 3 esteemed alumni PE executive leaders to campus to learn about their journey and how Mines has impacted their trajectory and what their experience can bring to the Mines community. Moderating our discussion is Mines President, Professor Dr. Paul Johnson, and PE Department Head, Dr. Jennifer Miskimmons. So welcome to all of you. I noticed that Steve, you got the King's chair. I chose there. So I have the honor of introducing our panelists, and so they are today Bill Ward, Jeff Vaughan, and Steve Enger, and they will walk us through their paths in becoming business leaders and discuss the future of the petroleum industry. And I know we have a lot of questions that have been pre-populated, which we will get to, but also if you have any questions in the room, hopefully you're thinking about those for later on in the program. All right, so some biographical information of our panelists. First, Steve Enger. Steve was the founder, president, and CEO for Edge Energy before retiring in 2021. After graduating from Mines in 1981 with a bachelor's in petroleum engineering, he went on to receive his MBA from UCLA in 1998. Steve has over 40 years of oil and gas experience working in different industries. He was the CFO for Bonanza Creek Energy, CFO, COO, and president of Allure Energy Incorporated, a Wall Street analyst and research director with Petrie Parkman, where he focused on evaluating oil and gas companies for energy investors and analyzing world oil markets. He also spent 16 years in engineering and strategic planning with Atlantic Richfield. Steve currently sits on the Foundation Board of Governors, Mines committees focused on entrepreneurship and technology transfer, and the Petroleum Engineering Department's 100th Anniversary Committee. Welcome, Steve. Thank you. Next, we have Jeff Faun. Jeff graduated from Mines in 1996 with a bachelor's in petroleum engineering, and he is the president and CEO for Tracker Resources Development 3, LLC, a private equity-backed company Jeff founded in 2004. The focus of his career has been on large-scale oil and gas resources. His team at Tracker 2 developed a 170,000-acre position in the Bakken Play in North Dakota and drilled 53 lateral wells to prove the resource potential of over 200 MMBOE. This was followed by Tracker 3 in assembling a position of 26,000 acres in the Midland Basin and drilling 28 horizontal wells. Jeff currently serves on the Foundation Board of Governors, the Executive Board of Colorado Uplift, and is involved in urban youth. Welcome, Jeff. And Bill Ward. After Bill graduated from Mines in 1984 with a bachelor's in petroleum engineering, he joined Ward Petroleum as a drilling completions production reservoir engineer. In 1987, he earned an MBA in finance from Southern Methodist University. In 1989, he founded Gale Force Compression Services and served as president until 1995, when the company was sold to a large public company. Ward became president of Ward Petroleum in 1996 and was named CEO in 2002. In 2008, Ward expanded into the Rockies, and in 2014 partnered with Trilantic Capital Partners to create Ward Energy Partners and move aggressively to develop Ward's assets in the Mid-Continent and the Rockies. In 2018, WEP sold significant assets, and currently Ward Energy is focused on wise energy investment. Bill. We turn it over to President Johnson and the panel. I do want to introduce the department head of Petroleum Engineering. She has been a department head since 2020, Jennifer Miskimmons. She's a Mines alumna and joined the Mines faculty in 2002. She has 32 years of experience in the petroleum industry, starting with Marathon Oil Company as a production and completions engineer and production foreman. Ms. Gimmons holds a BS from the Montana College of Mineral Science and Technology and MS and PhD degrees from Colorado School of Mines, all in petroleum engineering. She specializes in well completions, stimulation, hydraulic fracturing, and associated production issues, and is the founder and director of the Fracturing, Acidizing, Stimulation Technology, or FAST Consortium. A registered professional engineer in the state of Colorado, Ms. Gimmons currently serves on the board of trustees for the American Institute for Mining, Metallurgical, and Petroleum Engineers, and served as the first completions technical director on the Society of Petroleum Engineers, SPE, International Board of Directors from 2016 to 2018. She was an SPE Distinguished Lecturer in 2010, 2011, and in 2013, 2014 on hydraulic fracturing and unconventional reservoirs. And in 2014, she was awarded the SPE International Completions Optimization and Technology Award, the top technical award in her subdiscipline. Dr. Miskimmons. Turn it over to President Paul Johnson now. It's our 17th president at Mines. And you should also know President Johnson worked for Shell after his education, and maybe he'll make a few remarks about that experience in the industry as well. So President Johnson, take it away.
All right, thank you, Brian. Thanks everybody for being here. It's great to see the audience. I understand we have a whole bunch of people online who've been enticed by the answer to a quiz question. And what's the answer? 3? Is that the answer?
I don't know the question.
Oh, we don't know the question. Anyway, we'll see if it's revealed along the way or not. Anyway, so welcome to everybody who's online as well. We're going to start off with each of our panelists are going to take 5-10 minutes and tell you a little bit about their journey to, through, and after Mines to where they are today. Maybe a few comments on sort of their perspective on the industry, and then we've got a bunch of questions that people submitted beforehand. We'll work through a few of those. We'll take some audience questions, both in person and online, and we'll see where we get to in the time that we have. The panelists flipped a coin and they decided to go in the order of the most recent graduate to the less recent graduate. So Bill, I think you're up first. All right. Okay, so yeah, I lost out on the flip, so I go first. Thank you for this time, allowing me to be here. So maybe just offer a little more detail on my career path from Mines to where I am now. I arrived at the Colorado School of Mines in the fall of 1979. There were some interesting things going on in the world at that time that were affecting our industry. I see enough gray hair in the room that a lot of you will sympathize and remember what was going on. But think back to 1973, there was the Arab oil embargo, and Saudi Arabia stopped exporting oil to the U.S. The price of oil was about $4 a barrel, and it jumped up to about $12 a barrel. In 1979, Iran was in the midst of a civil war and a subsequent war with Iraq. And that caused the price of oil to jump from that $12 up to over $30 a barrel. And that was the trigger that those events were some of the triggers that led to what we call the boom, the oil boom. And so that was the backdrop as I entered School of Mines in 1979. I got to spend 5 great years here. I came in, thought I would study geology. After 1 year, I switched over to petroleum engineering and ended up graduating with that degree. Great experience. I was able to be a student athlete on the swim team here. I was able to be part of a fraternity. I was able to work summers for Conoco. They thought enough of me to offer me a scholarship and the promise of a job upon graduation. So that was my plan. So in 1983, things changed a little bit. Saudi Arabia ended up flooding the oil markets, and the price of oil dropped from $30 down to around $12 to $15. It was a hard time for our industry. It was a hard time for petroleum engineers, hard time for graduates, new graduates. So Conoco ended up rescinding the job offer. All of those events we affectionately refer to as the bust. But it was a tough time in our industry. Many of you will remember that. So I ended up back in Oklahoma. We had a small family business. We were an E&P operator that just worked locally there in Oklahoma, mostly in the Anadarko Basin. Our strategy for growth was just getting wells drilled. And so I was able to return, work for the family business we called Petroleum, and spent time working as a drilling engineer, completion engineer, production engineer, reservoir engineer. So just got a lot of diverse experience fairly quickly. I went back and got an MBA in 1987. I did that at Southern Methodist University. After I graduated, went in and started a business or new company called Gale Force Compression. And we provided natural gas compressors to operators in the Anadarko Basin. We're able to grow that company up to about 150 compression units and sold it in 1995 to a large public company at the time. Went back to work for the family business, Petroleum, in 1996, took on the role as president. Part of our growth strategy at that point was, in addition to getting wells drilled, was to do acquisitions. There was an interesting kind of window of opportunity. You may remember at that point, prices were not great for oil and gas. And some of the majors that were operating in the onshore lower 48 felt like that there were better opportunities overseas and offshore. They ended up selling a lot of legacy assets. That was an opportunity for a company like Ward to go in and buy some of these, what we felt like were really good assets. It was production and a lot of acreage that went with it. So there was a lot of upside. The areas that we bought this in would now be called the Scoop, if you've heard of that, or the Stack plays. So we were able to buy those assets and start developing those. Natural gas was a real driver for our industry kind of in early 2000. I think the U.S. had realized that natural gas was a reliable, affordable, and clean fuel source. And we had policy in place where we were incentivized to replace coal-fired power generation with natural gas. A number of factors led to price increases in natural gas. If you remember, gas was trading about $2 in early 2000. By 2008, it was up in the $12 to $14 per MCF range. So quite a climb in gas prices at that time. Also during that time period was the beginning of what we now call the Shale Revolution. And there were the first commercial onshore horizontal wells drilled in the Barnett Shale in that 2003-2005 time period. And that really has changed our industry from that point forward. And we're still experiencing constant change because of things that are going on with that technology advancement. In 2008, we ended up opening our Rockies office, and we did this because we were predominantly a natural gas company because we had operated in the Anadarko Basin pretty much our whole business life there, and we needed more oil in the mix. So we felt like that we could find that in the Rockies. We opened an office in Fort Collins. We built up a team to start exploring here. We were able to acquire assets and acreage and start the process of developing that. As the Shale Revolution progressed, it became very apparent how big of a game it really is and how much money it really takes to play in that game. So in 2012, we set out to raise private capital. It took us about 18 months. We ended up partnering with a company called Tri-Atlantic Capital. We formed an entity called World Energy Partners. We brought the assets and expertise to the table as far as acreage, producing properties, and the know-how. They brought the capital and some financial expertise, and then we formed the World Energy Partner Company. We went about our business developing those assets, and the pros and cons of having a private equity partner is that you're going to have a liquidation event at some point. So in 2017, we sold the majority of our Oklahoma assets. In 2018, we sold the majority of our Rockies assets, which were mostly in the DJ Basin, Colorado, and Wyoming. So I'm going to stop right there on my journey, if I may, and just give you a little bit on industry perspective, and then I'll kind of finish with that. So I think I'm just going to throw some ideas out there because I know we're going to have some time to discuss this, but I think the American Petroleum Institute has a very good statement about the future and the challenges and the opportunities that our industry faces. So I'm just going to read this right off their website. It's pretty short. The challenge of meeting the world's growing needs for energy while simultaneously ushering in a lower carbon future is massive, intertwined, and fundamental. It is the opportunity of our time. Governments, industries, and consumers must rise to seize it together. So that's kind of the big challenge and the big opportunity that we see. And I can come back to that, but we have a more immediate challenge in our industry right now. And I would say it's the perception of the oil and gas industry. And I think this is a great discussion to have. All the time we're bombarded with messages on climate change. And most of those messages contain things like the word urgent over and over, and the window is closing, and it'll refer to 270 top scientists from 67 countries that are reporting the bleakness and the code red for humanity. And that's kind of the message that we get. And it's really, I think the general public, they have to digest that. The other message that they get is that fossil fuels are part of the reason for this, if not the reason for it. And that's the message that's out there. And oil and natural gas in our industry as part of the fossil fuels, it's implied that we're part of the problem. Well, as I look out over this room, and I know a lot of these people here, we're part of the solution. We're not part of the problem, and we need to remember that, and we need to continually work towards being part of that solution. Finishing up on my journey from mines, since we sold all of our assets in 2018, or the majority of our assets, still excited about natural gas and oil investments. But our mission right now is to do wise energy investments. So we're not just limiting what we're looking at to natural gas and oil. We're looking at all the exciting things that are happening around carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We're looking at the excitement around hydrogen, all the technology that we're going to need to meet these big challenges. So I'm excited about continuing on in the natural gas and oil business. I'm excited about what's happening in the energy business. It's critical to our country and our way of life. And I just look forward to the rest of the discussion. Great, thanks. Thank you. All right, Jeff, you're up.
All right, thanks, Bill. So I'm glad you went first because you kind of covered a lot of things I was going to cover on the history. I came to mines in a little different way. By the way, I didn't graduate in '96. I don't know where that came from. I think somebody's having fun with me. You're probably wondering why I look so old. I did get a master's of science in global energy management in 2000, just recently, but I graduated in 1982, December of 1982, to be exact, which was the beginning of the end, as we call it. And yes, the oil embargo, which is 50-year anniversary of the oil embargo, is coming up next year. And well, hi, Dr. Wright. So I came to mines. I was the first one in my family to go to college, and I didn't know a lot about Carlsbad mines. I didn't have the kind of prep and research when my daughter started looking at colleges. We probably spent more money going around the country looking at colleges than I spent on my entire tuition. But I actually got some guidance from my friends, and they asked about scholarships, and I said, well, hurt my neck playing football. I didn't think I could get an academic scholarship. And they said, no, you idiot, they have academic scholarships. And I said, oh. And so I started looking at those, and I found one from the Solar Energy Research Institute, which is now SERI. And then, we didn't have the internet back then, so I had to write an essay. So I went to the library and researched solar energy. And things like the Ivanhoe, molten salt solar facility that they finally built 30 years later. And I got a scholarship through that, which allowed me to come to mines. And at the time, mines had solar panels on Twin Towers. So I really came here because of solar energy. And so I have followed that industry I have a unique attachment to it, and I followed that industry over time. That's why I went back and got my master's in global energy management. So we can get back to that later. But good thing was we didn't have to declare a major for a year and a half. So I got interested in petroleum engineering because I wanted to work outside. Quite frankly, I took the only guidance I got in high school was I took one of those 3-page surveys you fill out, and it said I should be an engineer, but it said sanitation engineer. I'm like, okay, got it half right. But I did not want to work in an office no matter what. And just I quite literally went to the library and researched petroleum engineering. And it was, to me, it was like Lewis and Clark, you're discovering new lands, you're discovering new fields, you're discovering energy, it makes a difference in the world. And so I got excited about it until I took my first petroleum engineering classes. How hard it was. But I got when I graduated, it was the first year that everybody around me told me it was the first year they didn't have 100% placement. And there were a lot of people smarter than me that had better grades than me that didn't get jobs. But I think part of the discussion here is how did you make it in your career? And what saved me was my innate curiosity. I had to work my last year because tuition went up. We get doubled every year we were here back then. So I had to work full time my senior year. And I worked for a company called Northwest Exploration, and I got exposed to this elliptical flow reservoir engineering simulator for natural gas, tight gas reservoirs that Brent Hale developed. And I asked about that, and I got to go to Salt Lake City and spend 2 weeks with him learning about it. And that's how I got hired. He hired me out of college. And so was I lucky? Yes. But the point is that sometimes you need to make your own luck. You need to be inquisitive, and you need to try to make connections everywhere you can and try to look at everything as an opportunity. And so that got me a job when other people didn't get a job, and spent 2 years in reservoir engineering there. And we were out spinning dead weights, testing wells, back then on Pinedale Anticline to see if we can build 20 miles of pipeline to them. And then they asked me if I wanted to go to Farmington, New Mexico for a couple of years. And that turned into about 12 years. But Williams bought Northwest, and the Fruitland coal boom took off. which was the first big, tight gas was really the first big unconventional resource. I mean, they had 3 nuclear bomb tests trying to frack wells back then, and one of them was in the San Juan Basin. But tight gas, and then the Fruitland coal, then introduced me to resource plays, and that, provided a great opportunity to learn something new. And I think that's the key thing I want to get across is that your knowledge doesn't stop when you graduate. It's only the beginning. It's only, that just gets your foot in the door. And what mines did for me is it got my foot in the door because of the reputation. And people would, instantly recognize that you met certain criteria because you graduated from college school of mines. And so from there, you have to take it upon yourself to continue to learn and learn everything you can. And I went from, being an engineer where I was responsible. I was 2 years out of college. I was running a $100 million program. And we were doing, the drilling engineering, the reservoir engineering, production engineering, all of it. So and we did some land and, I worked with the pumpers, and you get just a broad exposure, but I tried to soak it all up and learn as much as I could. And the main thing is to learn more than don't just focus on one specialty. I mean, that's fine. I mean, people can do that, but if you want to work your way up into a company, or if you want to run your own company, you need to know what everybody does. And you need to know, what are the land people? You need to know accounting, believe it or not, finance, legal, contracts. It's all important. And then now with the energy transition, which, by the way, when I got my scholarship, we were going to get, Jimmy Carter said we'd get 20% of our energy from the sun in 10 years. Okay. It's been 40 and we're nowhere close, but projections are another 30 years from now, we might make it. So it's not easy, right? It's not easy. I took every opportunity I could for training. I took every chance. Sometimes you have to go step backwards or sideways to move up. I had an opportunity after Williams decided they were going to sell all their assets in the San Juan Basin, which they didn't. Then I became a VP of engineering for an independent giant E&P. And then when they sold all their assets, they asked me to move to Scottsdale, Arizona. So I'm thinking, okay, petroleum engineer, Scottsdale, Arizona, what am I going to do there? Golf. And yeah, golf, I did. And they said, well, think of something. And they offered me the manager of crude oil trading and natural gas supply. Okay. So I thought, manager, I don't even know how to do it. How am I going to manage it? But the point is that mine's taught me you can do more than you think you can do. And so I did that. I didn't last long in the desert of Arizona I had to wear a tie every day when it was 110 degrees. It was only a couple of years, but it gave me valuable insight into the industry. And then, from there, I moved back to Denver and got into the private equity. I was recruited to go out and find opportunities to build companies. The first one was Buena Vista Hills, which was Buena Vista Hills Field in California, the old Naval Shale Reserve. And then it went on to Tracker, 6 companies that I founded, but really Tracker and Buena Vista were the most significant. And I didn't get my MBA at the time because I was just too busy working, but I learned as I went, and I took, I went to SMU executive MBA and things like that. But, so I guess I'd wrap it up and say that, mine's got me started, gave me a great opportunity in education, challenged me to the degree that I didn't think was possible. And it allowed me to, from there on, to see that I could accomplish much more than I ever thought. And the key to that is to continue to look for opportunities and broaden your exposure.
Thanks. Steve? All right, last and least. Clean up, yeah. All right, I got out of mines in '81. I was fortunate
perhaps to have been instructed by what I call the legends of petroleum engineering. Bill Mitchell and Hilchey and Van Kirk and Kohlhaas and John Wright, and Ramona was like a grad student in '79 or something like that, I think. So she was new on the block. But really interesting group, and that's a discussion for another time over alcohol for sure. Quick memories of mines. 150 credit hours, so 18 hours per semester plus field session. I don't think AP credit had been invented, at least not in my world, in 1977. So it didn't come in with any strong start in that regard. A Good Friday night was one of the few I wasn't doing homework. Activities were intramurals, band, and I don't remember much else. So not complaining, just a different place. I've had 2 sons graduate here in the last 10 years, and it's a much gentler, kinder, more supportive place now than it was then, and that's all good. So bottom line, in 1981, I had 33 job offers. I did not have 33 interviews, much less plant trips. It was crazy good, and as these guys described, it changed quickly thereafter. I chose to go to work for ARCO, Atlantic Richfield, a good sized company starting in Midland, Texas, for the reason that you got to move after your 1-year training program. So I went down to Midland, a lot of time in the field, extremely hot business, pun intended, I guess, in Midland at that point in time, and, just crazy busy and, wonderful place to start. A lot of time in the field, which a lot of my comments will be aimed at students. Get as much time in the field early on as you can. You probably heard that, but I'll emphasize it as well. Moved to Tulsa, the Mid-Continent District for 3 years. Again, a lot of time in the field. I think the other thing that was notable about that period was I was fortunate when I first arrived to be leading a large multidiscipline group charged with a large field redevelopment in the district. And so, it wasn't just drillers and ops guys and reservoir engineers, it was accounting and land people. And, as Jeff mentioned, you've got to really understand what everybody does. And that was an interesting introduction just a year out of school. So I think that was really useful. From there, I went to, I guess, sort of a classic broadening opportunity. It was a staff job in headquarters at ARCO Oil and Gas in Dallas. And if you've had a job like that, the joke is, I'm from corporate and I'm here to help. And you're not, and they know you're not. And so I'm interfacing with a district who I wasn't familiar with, hadn't worked there. And, I'm talking to mostly senior level engineering management. These guys might be my boss, right? They're all very senior to me, but I'm there to do a job, which is basically, at times to spy on them and, try to get some good info for corporate. And it's a really interesting dynamic. So I don't know that I really learned a lot of skills. I probably should have learned a lot of skills coming out of that, but I'm not sure they took or stuck, but it was interesting. And the technical side of it was also quite interesting because we were charged with advancing, I guess, what I would call ARCO's, sort of conventional technology away from R&D. So we maintained computer programs, mainframe computer programs that did all sorts of things. A significant role was to teach courses. So we're teaching peers, right? I'm only a few years out of school, technical courses. Well, no better way to learn the material, that's for sure, than to be in front of a group of your peers and be charged with helping them learn a topic. So from there, I was able to go to Alaska for ARCO in the 80s. That was the place to be. ARCO had discovered Prudhoe Bay in 1969, brought it on in 1977, Park in 81. I moved to Alaska in 1987. It was hopping, right? We were drilling wells and spending money really, really fast. And it was a blast as an engineer. So I came in as an ops engineer working one of 2 drill sites, which were the start of enhanced oil recovery at Capart. It was a miscible gas injection project. And then I was promoted to be a supervisor, trying to figure out ways to develop an immense 20, 30 billion barrels in place, cold, shallow, heavy oil project called West Sac. And eventually they did solve, at least to a much better solution than we ever did at the time. Bounced back into reservoir engineering, was involved leading a group that was charged with managing the full field water flood and implementation of immiscible and miscible WAG across the field. So some really interesting, big strategic kinds of projects. And then finished my 7 years in Alaska as strategic planning manager. So again, a developmental kind of move, obviously outside of engineering, looking at things from 30,000 feet, got pretty heavily involved in the broad ARCO planning culture. And so we would spend time doing in-depth studies on commodities, grains, for example, as a means to better understand what oil and natural gas markets might do. So a lot of fun. Out of the blue, or at least it kind of seemed so at the time, I got a call that from Los Angeles, which was ARCO's headquarters for the corporation, asking me to come down and be a manager in investor relations and basically explain ARCO to the investment community. Okay, so here's an engineer with 3 years in strategic planning that is going to go down and try to sound smart in front of Wall Street guys. So needless to say, the learning curve was very steep, and I really enjoyed it. And I learned, about ARCO's other businesses, downstream, midstream, coal, chemicals, etc. But what I really learned there was the business. And, I was spending days with the financial reporting and analysis group trying to understand the financials that were, about to be reported or were just reported, so I could, provide some value to the money managers out there who were interested in ARCO. I ended up starting my MBA there, and I finished it after I moved here to Denver. But I think, as you've already heard, really the education, the business education came on the job, and that was great. So it was an opportunity to do something very different than what I had done, and it really ended up being a significant pivot in my career. So at this point, I'm pretty far from engineering and kind of wondering, what's next. And the challenge with being in investor relations is people are only interested in what you have to say about your company. Okay, so it's a little limiting over time. So I come to Denver, I talked Tom Petrie into creating a role as an analyst working for Petrie Parkman. So a sell-side analyst, Wall Street analyst. So now I'm covering 12 to 18 companies. I'm doing the oil markets macro work, and it's much broader than the IR. Loved it. All along the way, I'm very involved in SPE. I was section chairman in Alaska, did a variety of things in Dallas previously, very involved with mines. I restarted the mines alumni group in Alaska, had to find another group to get involved with. So the National Association of Petroleum Investment Analysts, I became president of that group. And so I think it's been a fun way to maybe enhance the sort of the work element along the way with some organizations that I've loved. So I did that for 9 years. We sold Petrie Parkman to Merrill Lynch. I was ready to go do something else. It turned out, with the Wall Street experience in particular, a couple of small private companies that were looking to go public valued that kind of background. So I worked for Allura Energy for 3 years. Came in basically as VP of IR to help them get public and be successful. Life throws lots of curveballs along the way, and the Haynesville play came to us and through us. Luckily, that was great. We did a big deal with Chesapeake until the 11th hour when that went away, and we finally ended up selling the company in 2 pieces to Oxy and Exxon, and it worked out real well. Briefly at Bonanza Creek, same thing, pre-public. I came in as the CFO. It wasn't the right fit. I resigned pretty quickly. I think that it was just another indication, and to myself that I needed to go do my own thing. So I did. I was an overnight entrepreneur at age 52, 30 years into my career. And that's not the way most people do it, and nor do I necessarily suggest it, but it worked for me. So I felt like I spoke, a lot of the languages that were necessary or going to be helpful to be successful. I had a strong technical background, but also had good understanding of basic business, accounting, and finance, as well as the investing side of things. So quickly, the first entity I diligenced hard for a year. I found a geologist who was very familiar with the specific play, which is a redevelopment in eastern Wyoming, and got the right capital, got mezz capital, cheaper than private equity. And the short version is, as oil prices plummeted and we produced H2S, that project went south fairly quickly. So did everything right on paper and 0 for 1. Luckily, the second one worked better. At the same time, I was working on a farm out in Wattenberg Field, DJ Basin, as Bill's already mentioned. And we're able to secure that, extend it, and ultimately drill 4 wells that worked. And after drilling only 4 wells, we were able to sell to a larger entity, kind of the classic way that private equity models are supposed to work. And I'm going to leave it there. I retired last fall after 40 years, and I'm interested in lots of other things going forward that will occupy my time. I do want to make 2 quick comments on the future of petroleum engineering. I guess it's obvious I'm bought in. I've got 2 sons who are PEs for mine, so it probably kind of says it all. But I think the future is very bright. And I think the future is very bright for what I'll call conventional. I don't mean as compared to shale or resource plays, work for petroleum engineers. We are going to evolve in terms of energy mix, in my opinion, to include other things, right, as we've worked to do over a very long period of time. I don't view it as a revolution. I don't view it as a transition in the sense that people talk about this is something that's going to happen pretty quickly. It's going to be a very lengthy process. And I think people just miss the enormity of the energy system worldwide. And if you look back as a historian at previous energy transitions, they've generally been quite lengthy and also logical in terms of current energy being replaced by energy that has greater density and is less expensive as well. So I think that petroleum engineers are going to continue to be in great demand. I think there's only a couple thousand a year that graduate in petroleum engineering. I happen to look for perspective. There's 48,000 mechanical engineers graduated every year. A pretty small group. And I believe that the supply demand is going to work very well for those of you that continue to be interested in the profession. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks to our panelists for giving us those insights. We actually did pretty good. We have some questions. I thought I would sort of combine a few of them in a way. Maybe give you sort of an overarching thing and then give you the chance to choose between 3 questions. Or maybe fight over them. I don't know. But one of the things that's always amazed me is if you look at the graduates of the petroleum engineering department in the 80s to like 90 time, they all had to deal with some pretty cyclical aspects of the market. All had to kind of rethink what they thought their career was going to be. And I am amazed at how many of them have ended up being CEOs of companies along the way, right? So from the early 80s graduates like yourselves to the late 80s graduates, we've got quite a few folks out there who are really, they're leading a lot of companies. And it's sort of amazing that time period would produce so many folks like yourselves. But all of you mentioned the energy transition in one way or the other. And I know, the audience, certainly the folks who are just sort of starting their careers, transition's a scary word, right? You'd like to know that sort of like whatever you're studying or whatever career you're going to go into, that you're not going to be halfway through it and realize, the rug just got pulled out from under you and whatever. Now, all of you spoke very optimistically about the future as well and stuff. So kind of I had sort of three questions under this sort of energy transition heading. One of them is just in general, from a professional career standpoint, how do you deal with transitions? Like what advice do you have people for dealing with? Because I think I think people expect it of the oil industry. I think it's going to happen in every industry any of our graduates go into. But kind of how do you deal with that uncertainty of a transition and navigating your careers would be one question. Second one is I'm curious your thoughts on how oil and gas is going to be in that mix of the energy transition as it goes forward. Are we going to see it leading to sort of different products or being used in different ways, or how's it going to sort of fit into the mix? And then the other thing is just, and some of you started to do this a little bit, and Bill, you mentioned we all should be part of the solution going forward, things like that. But how do you explain to your neighbors what you do and why that's such a great thing for everybody going forward in the future? So those were the three things under that transition heading. And I thought I'd let each of you choose one of them so we don't all go through each one. But Steve, since you went last on the last, I thought I'd give you first chance at choosing one of those three questions.
Great, thank you. So I think it was the last one, Paul. How do you explain to people, what it is you do, and frankly, why, why we do it, and why I've loved it, and why it's been great for 40 years. And I think I've got a pretty succinct answer to that, which is, and I've evolved to this. There probably were a lot of different reasons early on. I think at this point in time, my main interest is to provide inexpensive, at least affordable energy to those that are living without it. And I've become much more interested worldwide in the literally billions of people that don't have access to affordable energy with dramatic negative impacts on their health and lifespans. So I think that you don't hear that as a message about the business, the oil and gas business, very often, and not nearly often enough.
Oh, that's great. No, I think that's true. If you look at certainly the history of society and cultures and everything, I mean, energy is a huge enabler of prosperity, right? And if you don't have that, you don't have the other thing. And so I think that's always been a great part of that story is look at how much the world has changed since the oil and gas industry came to be, and look at, I mean, it's really interesting when you don't have access to it, like things are happening today that make that happen. You really realize how much you depend on something. How much a small change in price affects people's lives, just in general, what they can do. So anyways, that was great. I don't know if you
Can I jump in on that?
Sure.
Yeah, energy is prosperity, but it's also liberty and equity. In terms of you can't have the type of society we have in the United States without a secure source of energy and abundant economic energy, right? It allows companies Apple to take off, or Amazon, all those companies, all those products that are made from byproducts of petroleum, but just having the energy, whether it's natural gas or fuel or medicines that come from oil and gas, without a secure supply of that, you can't have that. You can't have free. I mean, look at where we are in the world. If Germany made a decision, I'll go into the energy transition, right? Germany made a decision many years ago to go all in on solar and wind. And they shut down their nuclear plants because of Fukushima, which was a badly designed plant from an engineering standpoint. That's another subject. So what happened? I mean, well, the United States increased use of natural gas. Our CO2 emissions went down 15%. Germany went all in and their emissions went up. Well, why is that? Well, because when the wind didn't blow and the sun didn't shine, they had to fire up the coal plants. And their coal is lignite. It's not it's not the higher quality coal we have here. So their emissions went up. And so, you have this energy transition, in my mind, started with the oil embargo. We're going to get 20% of our energy from the sun in 10 years. I mean, That's when it really started. And it's been a long road coming. I mean, it's been exponential growth recently. And I'm a fan of wind and solar, but when you talk to the people who do it on a day-to-day basis, which is part of why I went back to get that Master of Science degree, because if you're in the oil and gas industry, you have to understand the energy transition. And if you just read the headlines, you're going to be sadly misinformed. Either way, pro or con. I could, when I was in the program, I could take, we had every head post on all our classes 3 times a week on different subjects. I could go out and defend any point of view, and I could find 3 references for it. But if you dig in on the references, that's when you really understand what's going on. And so if you really get into the IP, AC, if you really get into the 1,200-page document, not just the political summary of it, you get a different picture. And so it's hard. And the people that are in the industry, everybody knows where the wind blows. Everybody knows where the sun shines. I mean, you can Google it, right? It's not like you have to shoot 3D seismic and figure out where you're going to drill. The hard part is land access, getting into the grid. The grid's like a giant pipeline that's full. So you have to compete to get in there. So there are challenges. There's also huge challenges in mining for all the metals and minerals that go into the transition. So it's going to be a longer transition because they're physical. And I mean physics, laws of physics that will limit what you can do. And we're approaching the edge of efficiency. And so now you have to go on scale. And the difficulty is when you scale up the entire electrical grid on an intermittent source, you're going to have issues. And so I think it's going to be a longer transition. I said 5 years ago, I thought it was going to take 10 years for people to realize that. I think people are realizing it now.
Thanks. Can I add one thing? Because I think everything you guys said is very relevant. If you just look at these think tanks that study energy demand going forward, they're telling us that the energy demand by 2040 is going to be somewhere between 22 to 28% over what it is today. Which we talked about this. We need to think of this in a world type scenario, and there's tons of models, but EIA in their model, they're forecasting oil demand to increase by 10%. And if you ask the general public, what's going to happen to oil, that they won't agree with that. Natural gas is going to go up close to 30%, the demand for natural gas. All of the others continue, renewables go up over 300%. So yes, renewables are going to gain a lot. But the demand for energy is such that oil and natural gas is going to be such an integral part of it going forward. There is a big future, for oil, natural gas, petroleum engineers. There's no doubt. Great. Let's see how we're doing. Maybe we got time for one other one to get through. So I'm sort of curious. Steve, you mentioned you've got 2 sons who went through the program recently. You've all been very entrepreneurial. That's like the petroleum engineers for mines or the original entrepreneurs for mines, right? I haven't met one yet who wasn't for some reason like you, but you weren't like trained to be that. You just sort of, that's the nature of the business, right? Just curious if you had to sort of imagine what the really cool career is for the student who graduates now, who's getting in the energy business from the petroleum side. What's that really cool career look like? And then, they do for the first 10 years, maybe the next 20 years, whatever. But wondering Steve, I'll probably start because you probably have these discussions with your son.
I haven't, but it sounds
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
over Thanksgiving dinner. So, I kind of equipped, I became an entrepreneur 30 years into my career, which is fairly unusual. So I don't know that, I think there's any particular path, right? I loved literally every job I ever And, they built upon one another. I enjoyed the technical side of it, the strategic planning, the investing analysis pieces of it. And, I guess maybe it's trite to say, but it's more about the journey. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think we all need to ask ourselves what success looks like to each of us. And it's going to look a little bit different. We talk about being an entrepreneur and starting a business, and that sounds glamorous, but that's not for everybody. There's a lot of interesting things that go on concerning managing people. So while I think it's a great path, I think what we need to do as individuals is just ask ourselves, what does success look like for us? And that may be that you want to travel the world. That may be that you want to live in a certain place. That may be that you want to, have a home base. You want to be there with your family. So you don't want maybe this 24/7 type deal, or maybe you want to, be on a 24/7, but you're off for. So, there are so many options in the business that I think just, asking yourself, what it is you really want and just focusing on that. And there will be a pathway in this industry that I think will meet those needs.
Yeah, interesting question. I guess again, it's going to depend on each individual's perspective, but I think, there's big focus now on serving and how you can play a role in that transition, and think about what can you do or what's interesting to you in providing energy, which is essential for everything we do in this world. So there are a lot of unique opportunities out there. I think one thing that's changed in the last 10 years is data and data management and data analysis, analytical data, where you just have so much more data available that you can quickly come to solutions that would take us much longer to do many years ago. And then technology. The amazing technology that was developed during the hard times. I mean, it was 21 years from the peak when oil peaked at $39 a barrel. 21 years before it got back up there. And what that forced the industry to do was figure out a way to drill and complete cheaper. And so we developed the technology. I didn't, somebody did. It was brilliant. And, to be able to drill down 2 miles, turn the corner and go out another 2 miles is amazing. And so what's that next level of technology? And there's an amazing amount of variety of applications you see in all of the industry functions that I go to that lever off of technology and data analytics.
Jennifer, I thought I'd give you the last word. And maybe I'm just sort of curious what, you've listened to all this, and obviously you kind of live this day in and day out. With talking to the next generation that's going into the industry and ones who are going to be sitting here in the chair 30, 40 years from now. So what's your pitch for?
So the pitch, so we're celebrating 100th anniversary of petroleum engineering at mines, which was mentioned. I think the pitch is we got another 100 years ahead of us. I really do, and I think that you've heard that here. Not expecting to see personally the next 100 years, but we are focused somewhat on the next 20 and how we can prepare our students to work in this world and to deal with some of the points that were brought up and how to talk to people about this and how to be part of the solution. I love that point. So the pitch too is check out, we've got a 100th anniversary website on the departments and it's tied into the foundation also to see what events that we have coming up and come celebrate with us. Come celebrate the last 100 years and celebrate the next. And we're doing some fundraising to help with that. a little bit. We firmly believe in the student experience here and the hands-on student type of situation. And so we're trying to set up for that coming. And I'm really happy to see a lot of students here today that aren't just here because they're going to get test questions. So thank you.
All right, well, awesome job. Hey, let's thank all of our panelists. We might hang around for a few minutes in case someone from the audience wants to come down and chat. So I think this ends the formal part of this, and feel free to come on down and talk to folks. Thanks again, everyone, for being here.